The BattleMech construction facilities on Hesperus have a long and storied history going back to their very inception. Over the past 250 years, no fewer than 13 major battles have been fought for the control or destruction of these mountain complexes. But 300 years before even the first of those, Hesperus was the site of a major Lyran covert operation, the success of which would change the course of history. Hesperus was at the time a jointly owned world shared between the Federation of Sky and the Terran hegemony. With the advent of the BattleMech, the hegemony needed secure sites to construct these behemoths. That they chose somewhere outside of their own borders at first seems absurd, but the fact that these facilities would survive the collapse of the Star League and the ravages of the Succession Wars just goes to show that they chose wisely. The Lyran Intelligence Corps immediately began efforts to infiltrate the facility and steal the plans, but their efforts were blocked at every turn. When Catherine Steiner abdicated in favour of her son Alistair, the new Archon began formulating plans that would take a more direct approach to acquiring the blueprints. It was February 7th, 2455, and one of the last outbound dropships of the day was departing when suddenly an explosion illuminated the night sky. The dropship had suffered a major malfunction and was now plummeting to Earth. Its trajectory was quickly calculated as crashing into the compound. The alarm was raised and the night staff at the BattleMech facility was frantically evacuated, while the pilot fought to slow the descent. Aboard the ship, the occupants held on for dear life and prayed that their pilot was up to the job he'd been hired for, hoping all the while that their deliberate detonation wouldn't be followed with a fiery explosion upon impact with the ground. As fate would have it, the crew was able to arrest their downwards momentum just as the ship disappeared behind the high mountain walls and touched down safely, if somewhat ungracefully. Disembarking, a crack team of 25 LIC operatives led by Colonel Simon Kelsois hurriedly made their way into the now deserted facility and began to hack into the mainframe. The hegemony guards quickly realised something was amiss and approached the miraculously intact dropship, only before a second detonation utterly destroyed the dropship and much of the surrounding area. This bought the infiltration team enough time to copy 90% of their target files before the order was given to withdraw, whereupon they escaped into the mountains. A short time later, they regrouped at a civilian starport and boarded a second freighter, headed deeper into Lyran space. Operation Prometheus was a success. With the BattleMech plans now in their possession, the Lyrans became only the second nation to field the latest technological advancement and immediately began construction of their own units. These would see their combat debut on Lorik in 2459, where Captain General Gerok Marik became the first leader of one of the great houses to die at the hands, or in his case feet, of a BattleMech. Alistair knew that there was a lot to be gained from his nation's new technological advantage, but also understood that continued proliferation of BattleMech technology was inevitable. The Federated Suns soon came knocking, seeking a trade agreement that would grant them access to the stolen data. Recognizing that there was little to fear from this distant nation, the savvy Lyrans were able to charge an extortionate fee that would bolster their economy. Furthermore, Davian mechs would soon become a thorn in the side of their rivals, the Curetans. Recognizing the danger, the Draconis Combine organised their own raid on the new Lyran construction facilities on Coventry. Theirs was a more direct assault, but was nonetheless successful, and so now 4 of the nations had the tech. The retributions for the failure to defend the compound were severe, spreading a discontent among the workers that would ultimately lead to certain of them defecting to the Free Worlds League, bringing with them the valuable blueprints. The League in turn would suffer its own defections to the Capellan Confederation sometime after. Even the periphery nations got in on the act. The Rimworld's Republic had actually contributed to Operation Prometheus, and though they lacked complete schematics, they hit the ground running once they were finally able to secure the missing pieces. Recognizing that the time to act was now, while the other nations were still in the early stages of development, Alistair began preparing for what would become known as the Long March campaign. Lyran BattleMechs first descended on the border worlds of Nox, Scondia and Trolloc Prime, easily scattering the Cretan defenders. The next major target was Caldria, but here they faced more stubborn resistance. The DCMS had dug into the mountains, and repeated assaults had failed to dislodge them. As the death toll mounted, Lyran commanders began to discuss the unspeakable. One final assault was attempted that saw an elite group of mech warriors scale the near vertical mountain walls to attack from the rear, but an ambush caught the entire unit by surprise and they were summarily destroyed. By doing so, the Curetan commander had just signed a death warrant for his entire garrison. The Steiner troops withdrew to a safe distance and watched as nuclear missiles rained down on the complex, obliterating the occupants and leaving nothing behind of the once mighty fortifications. The Long March campaign was a two-front war, however, and fighting was every bit as fierce on the Free Worlds front. Here things progressed at a slower pace, but the Lyrans were able to make some advances. The invasion would finally come to a halt during their attempts to retake the world of Alula Borealis, one of those captured by the bloodthirsty giant Gerok Marik. Here the fighting would continue for years, but it was the arrival of fresh Free Worlds League military reinforcements that turned the tide. The Lyran troops got a bitter taste of their own medicine, and lumbering over the hills towards them came the first of the Marik battle mechs.